This sort of persistent narrative that you're trying to sabotage Shedeur Sanders, especially after yesterday and not putting him in.
Shedeur Sanders has been having a rough time with the Browns. Now, new heated footage with team owner Jimmy Haslam has surfaced. Fans believe the clip shows Shedeur confronting him over unfair treatment inside the organization. I've got the details, so let's break it all down. The draft day disaster that changed everything. Things are getting tougher for Sanders. His rookie year is already off to a rocky start, and now the heated footage everyone's talking about has taken the situation to another level. To really understand what's happening in the clip, we need to rewind to where it all began. If you haven't been following, Shedeur Sanders entered the 2025 NFL draft cycle as one of the most highly anticipated quarterback prospects, fueled by his impressive college production, family pedigree as the son of NFL Hall of Famer Deion Sanders, and a media narrative that positioned him as a potential franchise savior. The hype surrounding this young man was absolutely unprecedented, with analysts and betting markets frequently projecting him as a top 10 pick, and some even considering him for the coveted #1 overall selection. But what happened on those fateful days in Green Bay, Wisconsin, during the 2025 NFL Draft wasn't just surprising, it was absolutely earth-shattering.
Tonight, Shedeur Sanders made the entire National Football League look like a whole bunch of petty fools. In some cases, racist fools. In many cases, Deion despising fools.
The football world watched in complete disbelief as team after team, pick after pick, passed on a quarterback who had just completed one of the most statistically dominant seasons in college football history. Let's talk about those numbers for a moment because they're absolutely staggering. In his final college season at Colorado in 2024, Sanders led the Buffaloes to a 9-4 record and an Alamo Bowl appearance, showcasing elite efficiency and production that drew comparisons to NFL-ready passers. We're talking about 4,134 passing yards, third in the entire FBS, 37 touchdowns, second in the FBS, and perhaps most impressively, a 74.0% completion percentage that led the entire Football Bowl subdivision. These weren't just good numbers, they were historically exceptional. Over his entire college career, including his time at Jackson State, Sanders amassed 7,623 passing yards, 65 touchdowns, and a 70% completion rate, setting school records at Colorado and earning Heisman Trophy votes. The expert consensus was equally impressive. ESPN's Mel Kiper Jr. had Sanders as high as number 6 overall in early 2025 mocks, praising his Polish and low error rate. By April, Kiper was calling him a potential QB1. The betting markets reflected this overwhelming confidence as well, with DraftKings having Sanders listed as the plus 100 favorite for #1 overall in late April 2024. But as we now know, none of that mattered. As the first round began on that Thursday night in Green Bay, something unprecedented started to unfold.
Shedeur Sanders made all those teams that had 143 chances to draft him before he went 144th. He shamed all of them, including the Cleveland Browns, who finally took him in the 5th round. I'm convinced only because the owner, the publicity-starved owner, just wanted some more shock value publicity.
Team after team with glaring quarterback needs began passing on Sanders. The Tennessee Titans at pick 4, the Carolina Panthers at 5, the Las Vegas Raiders at 6, the Chicago Bears at 7. All teams with questionable quarterback situations, all passed on a player who had been universally recognized as one of the top quarterbacks in the draft. The second day brought even more confusion and heartbreak. As round 2 began, more QB-needy teams continued to pass on Sanders, including the Browns at their original pick 35, the Jets at pick 36, and the Raiders again at pick 38. Quinn Ewers went at pick 40 to the Broncos, and Jackson Dart at pick 45 to the Steelers, both quarterbacks who had been ranked behind Sanders in most mock drafts. But the most cruel moment came during round 2, when Sanders became the victim of one of the most heartless pranks in draft history. While live streaming on Twitch from his draft party, Sanders received a call from someone pretending to be Saints GM Mickey Loomis, claiming New Orleans was trading up for him. Sanders excitedly shared the news on his stream, only to realize moments later that it was a complete hoax perpetrated by Ole Miss students who had somehow obtained his phone number.
Yeah, yes, sir. Let's be legendary.
Yeah, but you're going to have to wait a little bit longer, man.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
The video went viral instantly, showing Sanders visibly upset, saying, "That's not funny, man." It was a devastating blow that perfectly encapsulated just how far this once promising draft story had fallen into chaos and humiliation. As day 2 concluded with Sanders still undrafted through 100 picks, we were witnessing what many draft experts were calling the most dramatic quarterback slide in modern NFL history. This was a player who had been projected as a top 10 pick, universally recognized as one of the top 3 quarterbacks in the draft, and yet 100 teams had passed on him.
Well, Molly, I don't think, look, the draft isn't about fairness. That's really not what it's about, you know? And I think the reason why I say that is because I've said numerous different times, this whole process is very subjective, all right? It's very opinionated. There's human beings who are trying to assess players and their fit relative to the NFL and relative to their own, individual franchise.
The media reaction was swift and intense. Analysts who had spent months praising Sanders were now scrambling to explain how their evaluations could have been so far off base. Social media exploded with theories ranging from team prejudice to family interference to secret character concerns that hadn't been made public. The subplot that made this story even more compelling was the presence of Deion Sanders throughout the process. Before the draft, Deion had made public statements about certain teams he wouldn't allow his son to play for, creating tension with NFL front offices who weren't accustomed to being dictated to by players' families.
People were not comfortable with the risk that would be associated with taking him in the first, second, third, or fourth round. That doesn't mean I agree with it. That doesn't mean that anybody agrees with it. That just means that that's what the teams felt. So now for him, he's going to have to go back and look at that process and say, hey, look, what was it during that process that somehow made these people, meaning the 32 teams, feel as though I wasn't worthy of being picked much higher than I was?
Shedeur Sanders was finally drafted on Saturday, April 26, 2025, by the Cleveland Browns in the 5th round. But the question on everyone's mind was simple. How does a quarterback with these credentials, this production, and this level of pre-draft hype fall this far? The answer, as we would soon discover, was far more complex and controversial than anyone could have imagined. The stage was now set for what would become one of the most controversial selections in NFL draft history, creating drama that would dominate headlines for months to come. The Cleveland catastrophe, when owners attack their own players. The Cleveland Browns' selection of Shedeur Sanders with the 144th overall pick should have been a moment of relief and celebration. After 3 grueling days of watching 143 other players get selected ahead of him, Sanders finally had an NFL home. But what should have marked the end of his draft nightmare was actually just the beginning of an even more complex and troubling story. The Browns didn't initially plan to draft Sanders, but pounced when he remained available deep into day 3. They began calling teams around pick 135 in the 4th round to gauge trade costs, ultimately identifying the Indianapolis Colts, number 144 spot, as their target. Cleveland traded their 5th round pick, number 166, and 6th round pick, number 192, to move up 22 spots, a minor investment that Browns GM Andrew Berry later characterized as an opportunistic value play.
I just say the biggest thing for us, we live by our board. We felt like he was a good, solid prospect at the most important position. We felt like it got to a point where he was probably mispriced, relative to the draft. Really the acquisition cost was pretty light, and it's a guy that we think can outproduce his draft slot. So I wouldn't say it's any more than that. Obviously Shedeur has kind of grown up in the spotlight. But our expectation is for him to come in here and work and compete. Nothing's been promised. Nothing will be given.
GM Andrew Berry's public comments painted the selection as a straightforward business decision. A talented player who had fallen further than his ability warranted. When Berry called Sanders to deliver the news, he was characteristically direct. "You're going to have to earn it. Nothing is given." It was a stern message that would prove to be prophetic in ways nobody could have anticipated. The situation became complicated immediately. The Browns had already drafted Oregon quarterback Dillon Gabriel in the 3rd round, number 94 overall, making Sanders the 2nd quarterback selected by Cleveland in the same class. This created a dynamic where Sanders, despite his superior college credentials and pre-draft reputation, was entering a crowded quarterback room as the lowest man on the depth chart. Sanders entered training camp as the 5th-string quarterback behind Deshaun Watson, Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, and Gabriel. Despite his impressive college resume and national attention, Sanders was receiving minimal first-team repetitions and was clearly being treated as a developmental project. By August 30th, 2020, 2025. Following roster cuts, the Browns had streamlined their quarterback room to just 3 players, Flacco as the starter, Gabriel as the backup, and Sanders as QB3. Sanders found himself behind Gabriel, a player who had been drafted in the 3rd round, but was performing significantly better in practices and preseason games. Sanders' preseason performances proved inconsistent. In his preseason debut against Carolina, Sanders showed flashes of brilliance, but in subsequent appearances, particularly against the Rams, he struggled significantly, taking multiple sacks and appearing uncomfortable under pressure.
Shedeur Sanders did not play well. He took 5 sacks, he was 3 of 6 for 14 yards. And as good as he looked week 1 against Carolina is kind of how bad he looked week 3. Plenty of factors here. Obviously, people have pointed out online that 4 of the 5 old linemen he played with have already been released.
The performance issues provided ammunition for critics who had questioned Sanders' NFL readiness. Scouting reports had consistently highlighted concerns about his pocket presence, tendency to hold the ball too long, and struggles when facing pressure. But the real bombshell came when Browns owner Jimmy Haslam made comments that would ignite a firestorm of controversy. During a press conference on July 29, 2025, Haslam made the stunning decision to publicly distance himself from the Sanders selection.
We have good process, okay? And if you'd have told me, let's see, we picked him on Saturday, right? Friday night driving home, y'all are going to pick Shedeur, I would say that's not happening. But we had a conversation early that morning, and then we had a conversation later that day. I think we had the right people involved in the conversation. At the end of the day, that's Andrew Berry's call. Andrew made the call to pick Shedeur.
We have good process, okay? And if you'd have told me, let's see, we picked him on Saturday, Friday night driving home, y'all are going to pick Shedeur, I would say that's not happening. But we had a conversation early that morning, and then we had a conversation later that day. I think we had the right people involved in the conversation. At the end of the day, that's Andrew Berry's call. Andrew made the call to pick Shedeur. These comments were absolutely unprecedented. Haslam explicitly stated that he had nothing to do with the selection of Shedeur Sanders and emphasized that the decision was Berry's alone. For an owner to so publicly disavow a draft pick was virtually unheard of in the NFL. Haslam's comments drew immediate parallels to the Browns' 2014 draft of Johnny Manziel, a pick that was widely attributed to ownership intervention despite front office reservations. The fact that Haslam felt compelled to distance himself from the Sanders pick suggested he was trying to avoid a repeat of that narrative. But the timing raised questions. Multiple sources reported that there had been 2 separate meetings on draft day to discuss what to do if Sanders was still available when Cleveland picked.
It's one thing if the GM has the absolute call and he walks into the room and it's time to make the pick at 144 and he says...
There's no meeting and
he says,
I want this guy.
2 meetings.
Right.
What do you think the meetings were about? Consider the context. What were they meeting about? What they're going to do with the round 7 pick? No. They had a couple of meetings to talk about what they're going to do. And my guess is the first meeting was before round 4 and the second meeting was after round 4.
The media reaction to Haslam's comments was swift and harsh. Analysts and former players criticized the owner for potentially undermining Sanders before he had even taken a meaningful snap. The perception was that Haslam was setting up Sanders as a scapegoat, positioning himself to avoid blame if the pick didn't work out. Adding another layer to the dysfunction was the emergence of video footage showing Sanders confronting Cleveland reporters who had been critical of his play. In one notable incident, Sanders approached veteran Cleveland reporter Tony Grossi, who had been questioning Sanders' readiness.
So take a look at this clip of how Shedeur handled this confrontation with class.
Tony, I be hoping you got something positive to say about me. You only say negative stuff about me. And I'm like, I ain't do nothing to you. No. I ain't seen nothing positive that you ever said. I do something positive every day. But I'm saying, come on, Tony. What I do to you, Tony?
Wow, talk about handling it like a pro. Shedeur Sanders kept it light and classy, turning what could have been a tense showdown into a moment of charm and confidence.
While Sanders handled the confrontation professionally, the incident highlighted the growing tension surrounding his situation. The organizational dynamics created by having 2 rookie quarterbacks proved to be a source of ongoing tension, with Sanders carrying far more media attention despite receiving fewer opportunities than Gabriel. Cam Newton provided perspective on Sanders' situation, emphasizing that the young quarterback needed to focus on proving himself through his play.
Man, he was a 5th round pick.
Yep.
This is what you have to understand. The facts are what the facts are.
Yeah.
He was a 5th round pick. Stardom aside, he's a 5th round pick. What you have to do is put your head down and grind. And the thing that a lot of people don't give enough credit for for quarterbacks is the game is not just solely about completing the pass. The game is more focused on the neck up.
The Cleveland situation had become a perfect storm of organizational dysfunction, owner interference, and media scrutiny. Sanders found himself caught between an owner who had publicly disavowed him and coaches who seemed hesitant to give him opportunities. But what was happening in Cleveland was actually just a small part of a much larger story that was about to be exposed. The conspiracy explodes, collusion claims and shocking revelations. What started as questions about a draft slide and organizational dysfunction was about to explode into something far more sinister and far-reaching. The NFL was about to face some of the most serious allegations of systematic discrimination and collusion in its modern history. The first bombshell came from an unexpected source. On August 21st, 2025, Pro Football Hall of Famer Eric Dickerson made an explosive claim on the Pivot podcast that would send shockwaves throughout the sports world. Dickerson alleged that the NFL had instructed teams not to draft Sanders in order to make an example of him, citing his poor interviews and perceived entitlement as justification for what amounted to a league-wide blackballing effort. The NFL told teams, "Don't take this kid," Dickerson stated with absolute certainty. But then somebody called the Browns and said, "Hey, take him anyway." The implications were staggering. If true, they suggested a coordinated effort by the league office to manipulate draft outcomes based on personal and political considerations rather than football merit. Dickerson's allegations gained credibility when considered alongside pre-draft reports from CBS's Boomer Esiason, who had revealed that multiple owners had instructed their front offices to remove Sanders from their draft boards due to his torpedoed reputation. But if Dickerson's claims were shocking, what came next was absolutely explosive. Antonio Brown, the former NFL wide receiver known for his controversial statements, made even more specific allegations about the Sanders situation. Brown claimed that there had been a secret agreement among 31 NFL owners to avoid drafting Sanders, with only Jimmy Haslam and the Cleveland Browns breaking rank. Haslam broke the agreement, Brown posted on X, formerly Twitter. 31 teams said untouchable, but Browns went rogue. The motivation behind this alleged conspiracy was rooted in the NFL's desire to maintain control over player power and family influence. Deion Sanders' pre-draft comments about certain teams being unsuitable for his son, combined with Shedeur's confident demeanor, had apparently triggered a coordinated response from league leadership. The theories gained additional traction when Stephen A. Smith suggested that Sanders' treatment had uncomfortable racial undertones. Smith argued that white quarterbacks with similar attitudes wouldn't face the same level of systematic exclusion, drawing parallels to the treatment of Colin Kaepernick.
And why do I bring up Kaepernick? Because I keep reminding everybody that the owners, I'll never forget this as long as I live. The owners in the National Football League are very big on control. And Colin Kaepernick's position really railed them. It really riled them up, irritated them, because even though they received a check for over $246 million a piece because of their TV rights deal, they were mad it wasn't $250 to $255. They blamed Colin Kaepernick.
Smith's analysis provided historical context, pointing to the NFL's previous handling of controversial players in situations where ownership had seemingly coordinated responses to players who challenged league authority.
So in other words, you're willing to collectively send that kind of message, and don't act like it wasn't a collective effort. For all we know, teams collectively, meaning owners, had come to the conclusion nobody's going to touch them in the first 4 rounds. All right, now that the round 5 is here, our message has been sent, so y'all can go about the business of sort of lifting the embargo, for lack of a better phraseology.
So in other words, you're willing to collectively send that kind of message and don't act like it wasn't a collective effort. For all we know, teams collectively, meaning owners, have come to the conclusion nobody's going to touch him in the first 4 rounds. All right, now that the round 5 is here, our message has been sent, so y'all can go about the business of sort of lifting the embargo, for lack of a better phraseology. But perhaps the most damning aspect of the allegations centered on what many believe was the real reason for Sanders' treatment: his unprecedented contract demands and business arrangements. Reports emerged suggesting that Sanders had negotiated groundbreaking clauses in his rookie contract that could set dangerous precedents for future player negotiations. According to these reports, Sanders had secured what was being called a prime equity clause that gave him a percentage of all revenue generated from merchandise, sponsorships, and promotions tied to his name, image, and likeness. This arrangement effectively turned Sanders into a business partner rather than just an employee.
That the Cleveland Brown rookie quarterback has included a groundbreaking clause in his contract that could set a new standard in the NFL. So he has leverage, and he tried to use his leverage, and he did use his leverage to get something put in his contract. It says, as uncertain as quarterback Shedeur Sanders' future is in the NFL right now, one thing is for sure, he's transformed how NFL contracts work, and he hasn't even taken his first snap. The NFL don't like that.
The implications were staggering. If Sanders succeeded on the field, other players would inevitably demand similar equity arrangements, fundamentally altering the economic structure of professional sports. The NFL's alleged response to systematically limit Sanders' opportunities represented an effort to prevent this precedent from taking hold. Sanders had also reportedly negotiated unprecedented media rights, allowing his brother Deion Jr. to produce behind-the-scenes content and brand.
This is why they hate Shedeur Sanders. This is what it's about, man. It's that the things that he's coming in negotiating have never been done before. They always want it, and they like it for players to stay in a position of servitude. Hey, you come in, you run fast, you jump high, you say yes sir, no sir, and we'll tell you what you're allowed to have.
The theories reached their peak when Commissioner Roger Goodell himself was captured on video making cryptic comments about being worried about Deion Sanders.
Hey, big guy. What's going on? Hey, look. You doing all right? You gotta let my brother have his way in the league. Yeah, you gotta. I'm worried about your pop. How you doing? What you worried about him for?
I'm worried about your pops. What you worried about him for? Why would they be worried about Deion Sanders? Deion Sanders ain't gonna be on the field. Deion Sanders ain't gonna be taking the snaps. Deion Sanders retired.
The significance of Goodell's comments cannot be overstated. Here was the most powerful person in professional football expressing concern about a retired player who had no official role in the NFL. Tom Brady weighed in on the Sanders situation, offering support from someone who understood the challenges of navigating NFL politics.
Shedeur Sanders, why did he go so late in the draft?
It's a good question. I wouldn't have part of any evaluation process or to
Skip Bayless
see
says
that.
otherwise.
That's the problem with media is everyone can just say whatever the fuck they want. I actually texted Shedeur because I know him very well. And I said, dude, whatever happens, wherever you go, that's your first day. Day 2 matters more than the draft. I was 199. Who could speak on it better than me? Like what that really means. Use it as motivation. You're gonna get your chances, go take advantage of it.
The theories reached their peak when a fan filed a $100 million lawsuit against the NFL, alleging discrimination and collusion in Sanders' draft treatment.
And is suing him for $100 million because of Shedeur Sanders falling to the 5th round of NFL draft, claiming emotional distress, trauma, and other things.
Is there a way to add
the fan? Yeah.
Can I
and
add
collusion.
Can I add my name to that lawsuit?
Oh, go make it.
You wanted to be
class action. We ain't got to spend a lot of time on this because I don't think the court is going to spend a lot of time on this.
He doesn't have money for the suit.
Yeah. But someone did write about this, and there's some interesting points. I don't want to let it out. The dude does have something to stand on.
Legal experts pointed out that proving collusion would require evidence of direct communication between teams specifically designed to suppress Sanders' draft position.
You have your right to not draft somebody because you don't like them.
Yeah.
They just can't get together and say, we're not drafting this dude till.
Just like they
absolutely
put that,
correct.
Just like they put that sign up and say, we refuse the right to search.
But that's why the NFL wouldn't want this going to trial, because they wouldn't want discovery. They wouldn't want to open up all the emails and all of that stuff to search just in case.
Yeah.
As the saga continued, additional evidence emerged that seemed to support the theories. Sanders' jersey sales reportedly reached unprecedented levels for a 5th round pick, generating millions in revenue.
It says this is already paid off. Shedeur's rookie jersey has reportedly hit $250 million in sales, earning him $14 million in commission, which far exceeds most rookie earnings. In addition, he retains full ownership of all his personal media content.
The financial success of Sanders' brand, despite his limited playing time, provided what many viewed as proof that NFL executives had misjudged both his marketability and his value to the league. Whether the theories are ultimately proven true or false, there's no denying that Sanders' experience has exposed significant issues within the NFL's power structure. His story has become a lightning rod for broader discussions about race, privilege, family influence, and player empowerment in professional sports. The heated footage and public confrontations represent just the visible surface of what appears to be a much deeper struggle for control within the National Football League. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.